If you like this story, please hit the subscribe button so you don't miss the next exciting stories. And now let's enjoy the story.
The air was thick with dust and gunpowder, the distant rumble of explosions shaking the ground like an impending storm. The scent of sweat, metal, and burnt rubber hung in the wind as a convoy of Humvees rolled cautiously through the arid wasteland of Kandahar, Afghanistan. The sky was a suffocating shade of orange, heavy with the weight of sandstorms and smoke. Sergeant Jake Carter sat in the front seat of the lead vehicle, his knuckles white from gripping his rifle, but his eyes weren't just scanning the road ahead. He was watching Rex. At his feet, a German shepherd, muscles tense, ears erect, nose twitching, was on high alert. Rex had saved their asses more times than Jake could count, sniffing out IEDs, ambushes, and booby traps before they could rip through the squad like paper. The radio crackled with an incoming message. "Stay sharp. Enemy movement reported up ahead." The convoy slowed to a crawl, the nervous tension palpable. Every step forward in enemy territory felt like playing Russian roulette. Rex's body stiffened, his ears perked. His tail, which had been lazily wagging a moment before, froze mid-motion. Jake felt his stomach twist. He knew that look. "Talk to me, buddy," he murmured, running a hand down Rex's back. The dog sniffed the air, his nose working furiously, taking in scents that no human could detect. Then, with a single swift motion, Rex jumped off the vehicle, his body low, his tail rigid. "Get down!" Jake roared. But it was too late. The blast wave hit first, a shock wave of sheer destruction and fire, ripping through the convoy, flipping the lead vehicle like a toy. Jake felt himself lifted off the ground, weightless for a horrifying second before crashing down onto the dirt. His ears rang with the deafening roar of the explosion, and for a terrifying moment, everything went black. The moment that changed everything. Jake woke up to screams and chaos. Blood ran into his eyes, his helmet was gone, and his body ached like hell. Around him, the wreckage smoldered, flames licking at twisted metal. But then a bark, a desperate, frantic bark. Jake's vision blurred, but he saw him, Rex, still standing despite the fire, despite the smoke, despite the debris. The dog was limping, one of his legs bloodied and torn, but he didn't stop. He was dragging a soldier, Corporal Davis, by his vest, pulling him away from the burning vehicle. The enemy opened fire. Bullets whizzed past, kicking up dirt, some striking the already destroyed vehicles, causing secondary explosions. But Rex didn't flinch. He didn't cower. He lunged, grabbing Jake's sleeve, pulling him back to his senses. "Rex!" Jake coughed, trying to move. Pain exploded in his ribs. He was injured, but there was no time to check. He gripped the dog's harness, letting Rex drag him toward cover. His brothers in arms were returning fire now, shouting commands, covering the wounded. But Rex wasn't done. Despite his bleeding leg, despite the chaos, Rex turned back. He went for another fallen soldier. "No!" Jake screamed. But Rex was already running. A second explosion. The shockwave sent Jake reeling backward, his vision blotting out with static. When he came to, all he could see was Rex's silhouette through the flames, still standing, still fighting. The next thing Jake remembered was the medevac helicopter. The world around him spinning, the pain in his ribs making every breath torture. Rex was there, bandaged, hooked up to an IV, his body still tense as if expecting another attack. "You did good, buddy," Jake whispered, reaching out to stroke the dog's scarred fur. Rex's eyes softened for the first time that day, and with one last exhausted sigh, he finally let himself rest. The plane touched down at Dover Air Force Base, the steel hull groaning as its wheels met the tarmac. The cabin was silent, save for the occasional murmur of exhausted soldiers, some staring blankly at the floor, others clutching medals they'd earned but would never feel were worth the price paid. Jake Carter sat near the front, his bandaged hand resting on a leash. Beside him, Rex lay curled, his body stiff, his eyes half-lidded but ever watchful. The scars from the IED blast had barely begun to heal, and his left hind leg was wrapped tightly in gauze. The flight home should have been a victory lap. Instead, it felt like a funeral procession. Jake ran his fingers through Rex's fur, the once thick coat now patchy from burns. "We made it home, buddy," he murmured. Rex's ears twitched at his voice, but the exhaustion in his eyes remained. The soldiers exited the plane in silence, their boots scuffing against the metal ramp. Families waited at the barricades, clutching signs, waving flags, their faces etched with a mix of relief and sorrow. But as Jake reached the bottom of the ramp, a cold, unfamiliar voice cut through the noise. "Sergeant Carter?" Jake turned, his grip instinctively tightening on Rex's leash. A stern-looking man in a government-issue suit approached, flanked by 2 MPs. His expression was carefully neutral, too neutral. Jake asked, his gut already twisting with unease. "I need you to hand over the dog," the man said, extending a clipboard. "Rex is still government property. He'll be processed and reassigned." The words were a punch to the chest. Jake stiffened, his mind struggling to process what he'd just heard. "Reassigned? You can't be serious," Jake said, stepping forward. "He's done. He saved lives. He almost died. You're telling me you're sending him back?" The man's expression didn't change. "That's not your call, Sergeant." Jake's grip on the leash tightened. He felt Rex shift beside him, sensing the tension. "He's not a piece of equipment," Jake snapped. "He's a soldier. He deserves to come home." The official's voice remained cold, professional, detached. "We appreciate his service, but these dogs cost the Department of Defense a significant amount of money to train. The military can't afford to retire every canine." Jake's jaw clenched. He knew that tone. He'd heard it before. The same bureaucratic nonsense they had to deal with on deployment. The kind that got good men killed while officers sat in air-conditioned rooms, calculating acceptable losses on a damn spreadsheet. And now they were applying it to Rex. Acceptable loss. The words made Jake's blood run cold. "Where are they taking him?" he demanded. "Fort Bragg. He'll be reevaluated. If he's still fit for service, he'll be deployed again." Jake felt his hands shake. Rex was limping, burned, covered in scars, and they still wanted him to work? If he failed the tests, if they deemed him unfit, he knew what would happen next. He knew what the military did with broken assets. They'll put him down. The realization hit him like a brick to the chest. Jake looked down at Rex, who was panting softly, his ears flicking back and forth, alert but exhausted. He had given everything, his speed, his strength, his blood, to keep them safe. And in return, they were throwing him away like used equipment. Jake turned back to the official, rage simmering beneath his skin. "I want to adopt him." The man sighed. "That's not how it works, Sergeant." Jake took a step forward, his voice low, dangerous. "Then make it work." The MPs tensed, their hands hovering over their belts. Jake could feel his pulse pounding in his skull. The official just sighed again, like he'd dealt with this before. "I don't make the rules." Jake wanted to scream, to fight, to do something. But then Rex licked his hand. It was a small thing, a simple touch, but Jake felt his chest cave in. This dog had bled for him, saved his life, dragged him through fire, and now Jake was powerless to save him. "Fine," Jake said through gritted teeth. "But I want to say goodbye." The official hesitated, but finally nodded. "You have 5 minutes. 5 minutes. For a lifetime of loyalty." Jake knelt in front of Rex, blinking hard to keep his vision from blurring. "Hey buddy," he murmured, scratching the dog's ears. "You're a good boy. You always have been." Rex licked his face once. His tail gave a slow, tired wag. Jake swallowed hard. He couldn't break. "Not now. Not yet." "They don't deserve you," he whispered. "But I do. I swear I'll get you back." Rex just rested his head against Jake's chest, letting out a quiet sigh. Then the MPs took the leash from his hand. Jake didn't fight, didn't make a scene. He just watched as the only soldier who had ever truly had his back was led away, treated as nothing more than a line item in a budget report. And for the first time in his life, Jake Carter felt truly, completely helpless. Jake Carter had been through firefights, bomb threats, and near-death experiences, but none of them had prepared him for the helpless rage that boiled inside him now. He had been forced to watch as the best partner he had ever known was led away like a discarded piece of equipment. Nothing more than an expired government asset waiting to be disposed of. He stormed out of the terminal, his boots pounding against the pavement. His mind was racing, calculating his next move. He wasn't going to let this happen. Not without a fight. The moment he reached his truck, he yanked open the door and collapsed into the driver's seat, gripping the steering wheel so hard his knuckles turned white. He had 5 minutes to say goodbye. 5 minutes for a lifetime of sacrifice. "No, this isn't over." Jake pulled out his phone and started dialing. First, he called his old commanding officer, Captain Reynolds, the man who had signed off on most of their K-9 unit's missions. If anyone could pull strings, it was him. The phone rang once, twice, then clicked. "Carter," a gruff voice answered. "Captain," Jake breathed, forcing himself to stay calm. "I need your help. They're taking Rex. They're sending him back for reevaluation. If he fails, they're putting him down." A long silence stretched across the line. When Reynolds finally spoke, his tone was tired but unsurprised. "I figured they'd do this," he muttered. "You're not the first handler to lose a dog this way." Jake's grip on the phone tightened. "So you knew?" "Of course I knew," Reynolds said. "The moment these dogs become liabilities, the military finds the cheapest way to dispose of them. It's been happening for years." Jake felt his stomach turn. This wasn't just about Rex. "Then help me stop it," Jake said through clenched teeth. "Rex is injured, burned, barely walking, and they still think he's fit for duty? This is wrong." Reynolds let out a slow exhale. "You think I don't know that? I fought to bring back my own canine partner once. Didn't get far." Jake's heart pounded. "So what do I do?" Another pause. Then quietly, "Find the paperwork." Jake frowned. "What paperwork?" Reynolds' voice lowered, almost conspiratorial. "Every military working dog has an evaluation file. If they're deemed unfit for duty, they get medically retired. But the bureaucracy buries those reports. They don't want to pay for care. Find that file. If you can prove he's already unfit, they can't reassign him. Legally, they have to retire him." Jake's pulse raced. This was his way in. "Where do they keep the files?" Reynolds sighed. "Fort Bragg, Department of Military Canine Logistics. Good luck getting to it. It's a damn maze, and they don't just hand those files over." Jake was already starting his truck. "I don't need them to hand it over. I'll find it myself." Jake drove through the night, the highway lights blurring past him. His heart hammered against his ribs, his mind running through every possible scenario. By the time he reached Fort Bragg, the sun was rising, painting the sky in streaks of orange and red. The Canine Logistics Department was a gray, soulless building, the kind where paperwork buried real lives beneath layers of policy. Walking in, Jake tried to keep his expression neutral as he approached the reception desk. A middle-aged woman in a pressed uniform barely glanced up from her screen. "Can I help you?" "I need to see the evaluation report for Canine Rex, serial number 41287, Jake said, keeping his tone steady. The woman raised an eyebrow, tapping at her keyboard. "You're not listed as an authorized officer. Only Canine program supervisors can request that information." Jake clenched his jaw. "I'm his handler." "Doesn't matter," she said flatly. "If you're no longer on active duty with his unit, you don't have access." Jake inhaled sharply. "Is there a supervisor I can speak to?" She clicked a few more T's before looking back up. "Lieutenant Colonel Dawson oversees canine retirements, but he's not available for." "I'll wait," Jake interrupted. The woman sighed, clearly unimpressed, but motioned toward a waiting area. Jake sat and waited. Minutes turned into an hour. He drummed his fingers on his knee, trying to control the frustration clawing at his chest. Every second wasted was a second closer to Rex's execution date. Finally, a door opened. A stern-looking officer in a crisp uniform stepped out. His gray hair was neatly trimmed, his sharp blue eyes scanning Jake with a mixture of annoyance and curiosity. "Carter?" Jake stood. "Sir, I need the retirement evaluation for Canine Rex." Dawson folded his arms. "That's classified." Jake's temper flared. "That dog gave his blood for this country, right? And you're telling me I don't even get to know if you're about to kill him?" Dawson didn't blink. "You think this is the first time we've had this conversation, Sergeant? I've had dozens of handlers come through here, begging to save their dogs." Jake took a step forward, refusing to back down. "Then why do you still let it happen?" Dawson sighed, rubbing his temple. "Look, I get it. These dogs are heroes, but we don't have the resources to care for all of them. You know that. The military is about efficiency, not sentiment." Jake felt like he might explode. "This isn't efficiency," he spat. "It's inhuman. These dogs aren't weapons. They're soldiers, and you throw them away like trash when they stop being useful." Dawson's expression remained unreadable, but something in his posture shifted. Hesitation, maybe even guilt. Finally, he exhaled. "The file you want, it's in the restricted archives. You won't get it without a direct order from the Pentagon." Jake clenched his fists. "Then I'll find another way." Dawson studied him for a long moment. Then, quietly, he said, "There's a night shift officer who's a little more relaxed about security. If you're really serious, you might find what you need after hours. Jake's eyes snapped up. This was his chance. Dawson didn't say anything more, just turned and walked away. But his message was clear. If Jake wanted to save Rex, he was going to have to break the rules. The night was thick with humid air, the kind that clung to your skin and made every breath feel heavier. Fort Bragg stood like an iron fortress under the dim glow of security floodlights, the rigid fences and barbed wire casting eerie shadows against the pavement. Jake Carter had broken into enemy compounds before, but never his own country's. If anyone caught him trespassing, he would be arrested, dishonorably discharged from reserves, and blacklisted from every military organization he ever belonged to. None of it mattered, not if it meant saving Rex. Time was running out. Rex's scheduled euthanasia was in 2 days, and somewhere in the depths of this building lay the single document that could save his life. Jake crouched behind an abandoned Humvee, scanning the security rotations. He had memorized the patrols during his time at Fort Bragg, but it had been years since he'd been inside the canine logistics archive. I don't have time for mistakes. A pair of MPs strolled past, chatting quietly about something meaningless, sports, maybe, or weekend plans. To them, tonight was just another shift. For Jake, it was war. When they disappeared around the corner, he moved, low to the ground, silent as a ghost. He reached the side door, pulling out a small multi-purpose tool from his pocket. The lock was standard military issue, cheap, effective, but easy for someone who knew what they were doing. He had picked locks under enemy fire before. This was no different. Within seconds, the door clicked open. Jake slipped inside. The forbidden files. The hallway smelled of old paper and disinfectant, the kind of sterile environment that tried to erase the weight of history buried in its walls. Rows of metal filing cabinets stretched endlessly, filled with years of reports, evaluations, and forgotten names. Jake moved quickly, scanning the labels. Canine deployment records, retirement evaluations, decommission orders. There, his fingers trembled as he pulled open the metal drawer, his eyes scanning the files. Rex, serial number 41287. Jake yanked it out, flipping through the pages until his heart stopped. The report was doctored. His breath hitched as he saw the red-stamped evaluation. Fit for duty. No mention of Rex's injuries, his trauma, or the fact that he could barely run anymore. They weren't retiring him. They were hiding him. His stomach twisted as he turned the next page, scanning the signatures. One name stood out. Colonel James Ackerman. Jake's hands clenched the folder so tight his knuckles turned white. Ackerman had been in charge of their last deployment to Afghanistan, the same botched mission that nearly got Jake and his unit killed. It had been a failure, covered up by high-ranking officials. Rex was the only living proof of what really happened. They weren't putting him down because he was too injured to serve. They were killing him because he knew too much. Jake snapped the file shut, his pulse roaring in his ears. You bastards. He shoved the file inside his jacket. If the government wanted to erase Rex from history, they'd have to go through him first. Jake turned for the door, his heart slamming against his ribs. He had what he needed. Now, he just had to get out. He had barely taken 2 steps when, footsteps. Fast, approaching. Jake ducked behind a metal filing cabinet, pressing himself into the shadows as the door swung open. A security officer stepped in, flashlight beam slicing through the dark. Shit. Jake could hear his own pulse, could feel the sweat dripping down the back of his neck as the light swept over the cabinets. Move, move, move. The light lingered for a second too long. Then the officer kept walking. Jake waited, counted the seconds. When the door clicked shut again, he exhaled silently, then moved, back through the hallway, out the side door, into the night. By the time the base was behind him, Jake had already started planning his next move. The fight for Rex wasn't over. It had just begun. Jake Carter had been in life-or-death situations before. He had spent years in combat, staring down the barrel of rifles, dodging IEDs, and dragging wounded soldiers to safety while bullets tore through the air around him. He knew what it was like to fight with everything he had. But this was different. This wasn't an enemy he could shoot. This wasn't a battlefield where he could rely on instinct, training, and his rifle. This was a bureaucratic war, and the enemy was wearing suits and medals, hiding behind desks and forged paperwork, erasing lives with the stroke of a pen. and they were about to erase Rex. Jake gripped the folder tight, his hands clammy as he stood outside Colonel James Ackerman's office at Fort Bragg. He had broken into a classified military archive, stolen evidence of a cover-up, and now he was about to go head-to-head with the very man responsible for Rex's death sentence. "Don't think, just move." He shoved the door open. Colonel Ackerman barely looked up from his desk. His office was a cold, sterile space with perfectly aligned files, a spotless desk, and a framed photo of him shaking hands with a general. Everything about him screamed control. He glanced at Jake with mild irritation, like a man who had just been interrupted during an expensive steak dinner. "Sergeant Carter," Ackerman said, his voice dripping with condescension. "To what do I owe the pleasure?" Jake slammed the stolen file onto the desk, the sound echoing through the office. "Explain this." Ackerman's gaze flicked down to the folder, his expression not changing. He casually leaned back in his chair, intertwining his fingers. "That looks like classified information, Sergeant. You really should be careful where you take those." "Cut the bullshit, sir." Jake spat the last word like venom. "This report says Rex is still fit for duty. But we both know that's not true. You signed off on his euthanasia order. Why?" Ackerman sighed, like he was dealing with an inconvenient child. "Because, Sergeant Carter, Rex is a liability, and liabilities get removed." Jake's fists clenched so tightly his nails dug into his palms. "A liability?" His voice was shaking with rage. "That dog saved my life. He saved this entire goddamn unit, and now you're putting him down like he's worthless?" Ackerman's expression hardened. "Let me be very clear, Carter." His voice dropped into something deadly and cold. "Rex isn't a pet. He was a weapon. And when a weapon outlives its usefulness, we don't keep it around for sentimental reasons." Jake took a step forward, his heart slamming against his ribs. "This isn't about Rex being a liability, is it?" he growled. "This is about covering your own ass." A flicker of annoyance passed over Ackerman's face. "I don't know what you're talking about." "You do." Jake jabbed a finger at the report. "You sent us on a botched mission. You put our lives on the line for a pointless objective, and when everything went to hell, the only reason we made it out was because Rex found the second IED before it went off. And now you're getting rid of him because you don't want anyone looking too closely at what happened out there." A long silence stretched between them. Then, for the first time, Ackerman smiled. Not a friendly smile. A warning. "You don't have proof." His voice was low, dangerous. "And even if you did, do you really think anyone cares? A dog's life versus national security? They'll bury this so deep no one will ever know his name." Jake's blood boiled. "Not if I have anything to say about it." Jake left the office with his heart pounding. He had known Ackerman wouldn't back down, which meant he only had one option left. He was going to break Rex out. There was no legal way to save him. The court appeals process took months. Rex didn't have months. His euthanasia was scheduled for tomorrow morning at 6 a.m. "You always had my back, buddy," Jake whispered under his breath. "Now it's my turn." He drove straight to Fort Bragg's canine facility, his mind racing with a plan so reckless it barely felt real. He was going to steal military property. He was about to become a fugitive. But none of that mattered. Because if he didn't do this, Rex was going to die. The digital clock on Jake Carter's dashboard glowed 2:14 a.m. He gripped the steering wheel, his pulse hammering in his ears as he stared through the windshield at the looming silhouette of Fort Bragg's canine facility. This is insanity. The rational part of his brain screamed at him to stop, to turn around, to think of another way. But Rex didn't have time for another way. In less than 4 hours, the military would kill his best friend, the one soul who had saved his life countless times. "I will not let that happen." Jake exhaled shakily, gripping the forged ID badge in his hand. He had spent the last few hours hacking together a fake transfer order, posing as an official handler escorting Rex to a behavioral rehabilitation facility. It was all bullshit. But if it bought him even 10 extra minutes, it was worth it. He turned to the passenger seat. Sitting there, in the dim glow of the dashboard, was a loaded Beretta M9. Jake hated the idea of bringing a gun. But this wasn't just a rescue mission. If this went sideways, he wouldn't be walking away. "Here we go." He opened the car door and stepped into the cold night air. Fort Bragg's military working dog kennels were on the far side of the base, behind 2 layers of chain-link fencing topped with razor wire. Security was tight, but not impenetrable. Jake approached the front checkpoint, keeping his strides even, his posture loose but confident. 2 MPs stood guard. "Act like you belong." He handed over his fake transfer paperwork. The guard squinted at it under the floodlights, his brow furrowing slightly. "Haven't heard anything about a transfer," he muttered. "Last-minute orders," Jake replied smoothly. "Straight from Colonel Ackerman's desk. You know how these bureaucrats work." The MP's lip curled at the mention of Ackerman. "No kidding," he sighed, stamping the papers. "Fine, but make it quick." Jake nodded, stepping through before the MP could second-guess himself. The moment Jake stepped inside the kennel building, the smell hit him. Disinfectant and damp fur, the sterile, impersonal scent of a place designed to house weapons, not living souls. He moved quickly, weaving through the dimly lit hallways. Rows of cages lined the walls, each occupied by a military working dog, their eyes glinting in the darkness. But Jake only cared about one. Then, there. 3rd cage on the left. Rex lay curled in the corner, his ears drooping, his normally sharp eyes dull with exhaustion. "Hey buddy," Jake whispered, crouching beside the bars. Rex lifted his head slowly, then his ears perked. His tail thumped weakly against the floor. "Yeah, it's me." Jake reached through the bars, resting a calloused hand on Rex's head. The dog let out a low whine, pressing against his touch. Jake's throat tightened. "We're getting out of here, pal." But first, he needed the key. Jake hurried to the security desk where the lockbox for kennel keys was kept. But the moment he reached the door, "Who the hell are you?" Jake spun around. "A security officer." The man's eyes narrowed, one hand moving toward his radio. Jake didn't think. He lunged, slamming the guard against the wall. The guy grunted in shock, but Jake was quicker, pinning his wrist before he could grab his weapon. "Sorry, man." With one swift motion, Jake knocked him out cold. The silence that followed was deafening. Jake sucked in a breath, grabbing the man's keycard and swiping it through the security console. A soft beep, and click. The lockbox opened. Jake grabbed Rex's key and bolted back toward the kennels. Jake jammed the key into the lock, yanking the cage door open. "Come on, Rex. Time to go." The dog didn't hesitate. He leapt out, muscles coiled, ready to run. Jake turned toward the exit and froze. 4 MPs, standing directly in his path, weapons raised. "Freeze!" one of them barked. Jake's heart pounded. "Don't do this," he said slowly, shielding Rex with his body. "I just want to take my dog and leave." "He's government property," the MP growled. "Step away." Rex let out a low growl, his body pressed against Jake's leg, ready to fight to the death. Jake's fingers brushed his pistol. "Don't make me do this," he said. A tense, breathless silence. Then, "Stand down." A new voice, a commanding one. Jake's blood ran cold as Colonel James Ackerman stepped into view. And in his hand was a gun. The moment Colonel Ackerman stepped forward, the room shifted. The energy became heavy, charged with an unspoken tension that suffocated the air. Jake's fingers twitched near his pistol, but he didn't draw. Not yet. Rex, sensing the shift, pressed against his leg, muscles coiled like a spring. Ackerman stood rigid, his uniform crisp, his sharp eyes cold as steel. He didn't look at Jake, he looked at Rex. "This is disappointing, Sergeant," Ackerman finally said, his voice measured, deliberate. "I expected more from you." Jake's jaw tightened. "Expected more?" His voice shook with rage. "Expected me to just sit back and let you kill him?" Ackerman sighed, as if bored, as if this entire situation was just another bureaucratic inconvenience. "This isn't personal, Carter, this is policy. The military doesn't keep retired dogs. It's an expensive liability." Jake snapped. "A liability?" His voice echoed off the sterile walls. "Rex saved lives. He saved my life. He's not a liability, he's a hero." Ackerman's expression didn't change. "That may be true," he said, "but the Army doesn't keep old weapons. We decommission them. And that's what Rex is, an old weapon." Jake couldn't breathe. The words hit him like a gunshot to the chest. Rex, his partner, his savior, his family, was nothing more than a discarded tool in the eyes of these men. "You're a coward," Jake spat. "You hide behind regulations because it's easier than doing the right thing." Ackerman's jaw twitched, but his eyes remained cold. "This is your last chance, Carter," he said. "Step aside, you can leave, and we'll forget this ever happened. Or—" the MPs shifted, fingers hovering over their weapons. "Or you'll go down for this." Jake's heart pounded. He looked at Rex, his loyal soldier, the one who had never failed him, the one who had pulled him from the wreckage of an IED blast, the one who had stood by his side even when the world turned against them. And now, Jake had to decide. "I'm not leaving without him," Jake said, his voice like iron. The room exploded into chaos. Rex moved first. Before anyone could react, the war dog lunged, his powerful frame slamming into one of the MPs, knocking him flat. Jake didn't hesitate. In one fluid motion, he grabbed his pistol and swung his arm, aiming for the overhead lights. Bang! The room plunged into darkness. Shouting, footsteps, barking. Jake grabbed Rex's collar, yanking him toward the exit. "Move!" he barked. Rex darted ahead, his training kicking in, his instincts guiding him through the maze of cages and metal walls. Behind them. Find them. Now. Ackerman's furious voice, the sound of boots pounding against concrete. They were running out of time. Jake burst through the back door, sucking in the cold night air. The compound alarm blared, a deafening siren that shattered the silence. Damn it! Floodlights flashed on, illuminating the fenced perimeter. Jake's truck was parked 100 yards away, too far, too exposed. "We need cover," Jake panted, his eyes darting for an escape route. Then, a loading bay, a supply truck. Keys in the ignition. Bingo! Jake and Rex sprinted, their bodies moving as one. The moment they reached the truck, Jake flung the door open, shoving Rex inside. "Stay down." He jumped into the driver's seat, his hands shaking as he jammed the key into the ignition. Vroom, the engine roared to life. And then, gunfire. Bullets ripped through the air, shattering the windshield as Jake slammed his foot on the gas. The truck lurched forward, tires screeching as they barreled toward the chain-link fence. "Hold on," Jake yelled. Rex whimpered, his body pressed against the seat. The fence rushed toward them, the headlights casting long, violent shadows across the metal. Jake braced himself. Crash! The truck smashed through, metal snapping and twisting as the vehicle broke free onto the open road. The moment they hit pavement, Jake jerked the wheels, swerving into the darkness. "We did it, buddy," he gasped. Rex let out a sharp bark, as if agreeing. But it wasn't over, because in the rearview mirror, headlights appeared. They were being followed. The night air sliced through the broken windshield, stinging Jake's skin as he gripped the wheel with white-knuckled intensity. His heart hammered in his chest, adrenaline surging through his veins like fire. Beside him, Rex lay low, his ears pinned back, his breathing quick but steady. He was trained for chaos, but this wasn't war, this was survival. In the rearview mirror, the glow of headlights burned into the darkness. 2 black SUVs, military. "Damn it," Jake hissed. They were closing in fast. His fingers tightened on the wheel. There was no way they could outrun them on the open road. He needed a plan, and he needed one now. Then, through the dust-coated windshield, a dirt road leading into the woods. It was risky, unpredictable, but it was their only shot. "Hold on, buddy," Jake gritted out as he jerked the wheel, sending the truck veering off the highway. The tires kicked up gravel and dust, the vehicle bouncing violently as they plunged into the forest. Branches scraped against the sides of the truck. The headlights flickered through the trees like ghostly specters, shadows dancing in chaotic patterns. Jake gritted his teeth, fighting for control as the SUVs followed, their engines growling like predators in the dark. The forest grew denser, the truck rocking violently as it barreled over uneven terrain. "We can lose them here," Jake muttered. But the SUVs weren't slowing down. Then, gunfire. Bang, bang, bang. Bullets ripped through the trees, one shattering the side mirror, another punching through the back of the truck. Rex let out a low growl, his body tense. "I know, buddy," Jake gritted out. "They're not playing around. Up ahead, a river, a way out, or a death sentence." Jake had seconds to decide. Then, an explosion behind them. The lead SUV swerved hard, its tires skidding against the dirt, narrowly missing a thick oak tree before slamming into the underbrush. One down, one still coming. Jake pushed the gas pedal to the floor, eyes locked on the river ahead. "Almost there," he whispered. 50 yards. 30. 10. Then, the truck burst through the tree line and soared off the riverbank, into the water. The impact was violent. The truck hit the water with a deafening crash, the windshield shattering completely as the force of the river engulfed them. Jake's breath was ripped from his lungs as ice-cold water flooded into the cabin. The world turned upside down. Rex, Through the chaos, he saw Rex's dark silhouette, thrashing against the current, fighting for the surface. Jake kicked at the door, his fingers fumbling for his seatbelt. The pressure pinned him in place, the weight of the river pulling the truck deeper. Then a sudden jerk. A sharp pull. Rex. His teeth latched onto Jake's sleeve, tugging, pulling with everything he had. Jake's lungs screamed for air as he forced himself through the open window, his hands grabbing onto Rex's thick fur. With one final push, they broke the surface, gasping for air as the freezing night swallowed them whole. The forest loomed before them, dark, endless. Jake dragged himself onto the muddy bank, his chest heaving, his limbs shaking from exhaustion and cold. Rex pressed against him, his body shivering, but his eyes were sharp, scanning the darkness for threats. Then, voices. Find them. The surviving SUV had stopped near the riverbank. They were still being hunted. Jake's breath came fast and ragged, his mind racing for a plan. They were deep in enemy territory now. No guns, no backup, just a man and his dog. But Jake had survived worse, and so had Rex. "Come on, buddy," he whispered, gripping Rex's collar. "Time to disappear." Then together, they vanished into the woods. The night stretched on, cold and unforgiving, as Jake and Rex moved through the dense forest, their bodies battered but their spirits unbroken. The mud squelched beneath their boots and paws, their breaths coming in sharp, ragged gasps. Every shadow seemed to hold danger. Every whisper of the wind carried the ghosts of their past. The military was still hunting them, relentless in their pursuit. Rex, the war hero, the one who had saved lives, detected bombs, taken bullets for men who had abandoned him, was now a fugitive. His crime? Loyalty. Jake's hands tightened into fists. He had lost too many things to war, his peace, his brothers, his body, but he would not lose Rex. "They want to erase you, buddy," Jake whispered, his voice rough with exhaustion and fury. "Like you never mattered." Rex looked up at him, his amber eyes gleaming in the moonlight, filled with a quiet understanding. He had never questioned his purpose. He had served, protected, given everything. And now it was Jake's turn to protect him. The sound of boots crunching against leaves broke the silence. They had been found. Jake pushed Rex behind a fallen log, his pulse pounding like war drums in his ears. 4 men, armed, close. He counted his options. No gun, no backup, no escape. "You see anything?" one of the soldiers whispered. "No, but they're here. Keep looking." Jake's mind raced. If they took Rex, if they dragged him away, there would be no second chances. He wasn't going to let that happen. "Rex," Jake whispered, "you ready?" The dog stiffened, his ears alert, his muscles coiling like a spring. Jake reached for the only weapon he had left, a sharp rock, jagged and crude but deadly in the right hands. The soldiers were 10 feet away now, 5 feet. Then Rex lunged. The German shepherd erupted from the shadows like a ghost of war, his body a blur of fury and teeth. The first soldier went down hard, his rifle clattering to the ground as Rex's jaws locked around his arm, crushing bone, tearing through fabric and flesh. "What the?" The second man raised his gun, but Jake was already moving. He slammed the rock into the side of the soldier's head, feeling the sickening crunch of impact. The man staggered back, dazed, as Jake tackled him to the ground, wrenching the gun from his grip. The third soldier shouted orders, but it was too late. Rex was already on him. A scream ripped through the night, followed by the heavy thud of a body hitting the dirt. The last man standing took one look at Jake and Rex, both bloodied, both breathing like they had nothing left to lose, and ran. The silence that followed was deafening. Jake stood over the fallen men, his chest heaving, his fingers locked around the stolen rifle. He turned to Rex, who was panting, his muzzle streaked with blood, his tail held high like a battle flag. "Good boy," Jake whispered, kneeling beside him, his voice thick with emotion. Rex pressed his head into Jake's chest, his body shaking, but his eyes burning with the same fire that had carried them through war. They had won, but they weren't safe. Not yet. Freedom comes at a cost. Jake knew they had minutes before reinforcements arrived. He stripped the soldiers of everything useful, ammo, weapons, radios, then turned to Rex. "We have to go." The dog didn't hesitate. They moved deeper into the wilderness, heading for a place only Jake knew. A safe house buried in the mountains, beyond the reach of the military's leash. It would be a long journey, a dangerous one. But for the first time in weeks, Jake let himself believe that they had a chance. Months passed. The world moved on, but stories still spread. Rumors of a soldier and his war dog, two ghosts who had disappeared into the wild, two warriors who had defied the system that tried to erase them. There were whispers among the military ranks. Some called Jake a traitor, others called him a hero, but everyone agreed on one thing: the dog should have never been abandoned. People began asking questions. Protests started. The injustice of military dogs being discarded after service was no longer a silent issue. And somewhere far from the reach of the government, Rex lay beside a fire, warm, safe, free. For the first time in his life, he was just a dog. No war, no orders, no leash, just loyalty repaid in full. And he was finally home. No soldier left behind, even the ones with 4 legs. A war hero should never be discarded like trash. The price of loyalty should never be death.
Thank you for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, please support me by clicking the logo in the bottom right corner to subscribe to my channel. This way you won't miss any of the exciting stories coming up. Thank you so much.